Hey, it's your old pal Lucid Stew again. In this video we're going to talk about optimizing the Ancient Times art kit for larger sets and why your thermo may be going haywire while using those assets. I'm going to start by opening the Lost Valley of the Ancients set, Unlit. This is a scene I have uploaded to the Dreamiverse so you can follow along with the content in this series, so go check it out. Here we are in the set, let's roll up our sleeves and get to work. I'm going to start out with the Ancient Times asset called Tiled Roof. And this is a good example because I use it extensively in this set. However, I use two versions, one intact and the other with the painting removed to save on resources. My tests here are simple. I'm going to copy these assets as many times as I can before hitting a thermo limit. This is Tiled Roof with the painting removed. I have 100 copies and a gameplay increase of 1%, which is where it should be for a bare sculpt. I copy that a bunch more times to confirm. I make 1200 copies and see an increase of 12% in gameplay. Graphics was already accounted for because it was already in the scene, so no increase there. We can also establish that our baseline thermo is 56% gameplay and 56% graphics. Now I'll try the same thing with Tiled Roof as it appears in the Ancient Times kit. And I get an interesting result. Due to the painting, gameplay has increased 14% for only 600 copies. Also, graphics has increased to 100%. These are sculpts that were already in scene and already accounted for in the graphics thermo, so clearly something else is going on here. I'm figuring that it has to do with the painting, so I'm going into that and removing part of it to see if I can make more copies of a painting with fewer flecks before I hit that limit. I've removed probably half of the flecks in this painting. Let's see the impact of that alteration. To stay consistent, I'm going to make 600 copies of this one as well. Gameplay goes up 14% like before, but graphics has not increased, let alone gone to 100%. A very interesting result. To confirm and reiterate, I'm going to make a bunch of copies of Engraved Stone Block, which is an asset comprised of one sculpt and two fairly complex paintings. You get a hint of those numbers when gameplay goes up by 4% from 100 copies, and that 4% is from assets and the group. Now we're at 1,000 copies. Due to 4 times cost of the asset, gameplay is up to 91%. Graphics is 100% like our prior experience making a bunch of painting copies. And one more time with Ornate Block. I picked this one because it has a single very complex painting with a ton of flecks. This time we hit the limit with only 100 copies, so clearly our issue lies with the painting. This asset also has a few sculpts. I'll strip those out and you can see the paintings on these things are pretty crazy. Tons and tons of flecks on these. Let's copy just the painting and see what happens. We hit the graphics limit, but gameplay thermo increases by only 1%. Conclusion: this is some sort of hard limit on the amount of painting flecks in a scene. Well crap, which Ancient Times assets have crazy paintings? That's where my handy dandy Ancient Times assets reference guide is going to help. It's in the Dreamiverse, go check it out. In this scene I have every Ancient Times asset labeled, ripped apart, and inventoried. That way you can know ahead of time if you will need to alter an asset that you plan on copying a bunch of times. For instance, here are our friends Engraved Stone Block and Ornate Block. And we can see clearly both use quite a few paint flecks, so we might want to be careful how we plan to use those. Something interesting about the Ancient Times set is that outside of the painting limit, these assets are extremely light on graphics thermo. I have one copy of all 80 assets in this scene, and graphics thermo is only 76%. That means you can place one or a few copies of all of these assets in a scene and not worry about it. Where you get into trouble is larger amounts of copies. Taking a look at Tiled Roof separated, there are lots of flecks on that, which explains why we ran into issues. But painting flecks aren't the only thing that will give you trouble. Some of these assets group together a lot of parts. Old Water Dispenser is an example. Groups included, it has more than 25 parts. Another great example is Paper Lanterns. It seems innocuous, but it's made up of almost 50 parts. Let's make some copies of these two and see what the impact is. Let's go back into our unlit set since we know we're starting at 56 on thermo in there. It might seem a little crazy, but we can only make about 90 copies of paper lanterns before we hit the gameplay thermal limit. Without the rest of the scene, you double that, but the point is that this is an expensive asset from a gameplay perspective. And to reiterate, let's make some copies of Old Water Dispenser. We know it has about half as many parts as paper lanterns, so we should be able to make about twice as many copies. We end up hitting the limit a little early, and I think that's likely because Old Water Dispenser has a bunch of groups within groups. Also keep in mind you're not going to have a scene with 100 of these in it. As long as you keep it limited to small numbers, the impact will be minimal. So if you want a bunch of copies of these things, what can you do? Look for alternatives or alter them. A better alternative to paper lanterns from a gameplay perspective is hanging lanterns. Some quick math, we should be able to have about 4 times as many copies of hanging lanterns with the same gameplay thermal impact of paper lanterns. And with 200 copies, we still have some gameplay thermal headroom, so this is more or less confirmed. Old Water Dispenser is a different story because there's no functional analog within the Ancient Times set. However, this asset has a lot of parts. We can remove some and retain the same feel, and we may be able to get rid of some based on what can be seen from certain perspectives within the scene space. What I'm doing here is going through and seeing what I can get rid of while retaining the general shape and idea. I think to end up with something that is generally the same, you need to keep quite a bit of this asset. That's fine with this one though. Like I said earlier, you're probably not going to have a scene with 100 water dispensers. Speaking of perspective, you're almost surely not going to see details like these water bubbles, so you can get rid of them guilt-free. You're probably not going to see this little ribbon of water tucked into this pipe, and other details like that. You end up with something very similar which serves the same purpose visually. If we check the performance, we can squeeze roughly 20 or 30% more into the scene. Not a huge difference, but those are the kinds of judgment calls you'll need to make when building a larger scene with these assets. Hopefully you get the idea. Coming up, we're going to talk about optimizing the RDO character since it is rather expensive at 20% graphics thermo. After that, we'll start putting things together to enhance our scene, so I'll see you next time.